Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, first of all, hey everybody, thanks so much for being here. I know conference has been very long. I'm hoping to wake you up with this talk. I've seen that there's a bunch of people working in the back. This is going to be a talk about kind of a pragmatic and practical approach to how to pick a developer ecosystem to build on in 2024. I'll talk a little bit about my background, but in general, I'm a builder. I studied computer science. I worked as an engineer in Web 2, and for me, this is kind of me talking to you as like a personal advice. Obviously, I work at Berachain, so there's going to be some points where we talk about Berachain. But in general, this is a talk. You as a builder, you're building a product. How do you select an ecosystem in 2024? What are the things to consider? And we're going to talk a little bit about Berachain. So my name is Camila. I lead developer evangelism at Berachain. So we're going to start with, traditionally, when we've thought of different ecosystems, different chains, there's been this blockchain trilemma that we have been kind of taught to consider. These three factors: speed, security, decentralization. And kind of my thesis and the thesis of Berachain, and you know, I've heard Smokey and other people at Berachain say this, is that over the last like X amount of time, these three things have kind of converged to be the same across all ecosystems. Obviously, there's differences. Obviously, there's nuance. But for the most part, when you look at speed, security, decentralization of L1s, especially these new L1s, they're kind of all converging to the same thing. So given that these are all kind of the same thing, what are the actual considerations that you should take when deciding on what to build? So I posit that the things that you should actually be considering in 2024 are the following: liquidity, ecosystem, and distribution. So let's start with liquidity. I'm going to give you guys a crash course on liquidity because just to kind of all be on the same page. And one thing that I thought was really interesting is I found this quote on Twitter, and it says, "Best to be aware that liquidity comes from people." I think in general, when we think about liquidity, when we think about liquidity on an ecosystem, we think of it as a number, we think about TVL, or we think about some other metric. But I think the real important thing to consider here is that liquidity is like an indicator of people's interest. And liquidity has to come from somewhere. It's not just something that like exists out of thin air. Someone has to provide this liquidity. So when we're talking about ecosystems with deep liquidity, it's an indicator that there's a lot of interest and that there's either a lot of activity or going to be a lot of activity. So 99% of successful on-chain apps need liquidity to function. Even if we're talking about non-DeFi apps, most applications in crypto use some sort of crypto economic incentive, and because of this, liquidity matters. So let's define liquidity real quick. It's a measure of how easily assets can be swapped either for other assets or for them to be changed to cash. And the key part here is without it significantly affecting its price. So if you've ever tried to do a swap on, maybe like you've participated in meme coin season on Solana, you try to do a swap, it'll give you a little message that says, this can have significant price impact. Consider doing a swap at a lower quantity. If you've seen that message, that's kind of what this is getting at, is that if there's low liquidity and you try to do a swap for a big amount, or you try to like change this asset for something else, you're going to significantly affect the price because there's not a lot of liquidity there. And we'll talk about what this means exactly. But the point here is that someone has to provide liquidity for you to be able to do these actions, whether it be to trade, whether it be to borrow, whether it be anything that uses crypto economic incentives, someone has to provide this liquidity. And again, this isn't exclusive to trading. Any app that uses crypto economic incentives has to think about liquidity, whether this be even something like Farcaster. And the thing about crypto, right, is like if you're building something in crypto, you're most likely using crypto economic incentives. It's the differentiator of Web 2, right? So you're most likely using this. So let's talk about what it means for an ecosystem to have deep liquidity. It means that you can trade at the best price. And again, this has an asterisk. It's not necessarily trading as in like a swap or trading one asset for the other, but it means that you can interact at the best price, whatever that may mean, right? Like an asterisk, and minimal slippage. And what a lack of liquidity means is that there's a lot of change in price, high slippage, and it's likely an indicator of a lack of network activity, interest, signal. So this is where we're going to talk about Berachain. So Berachain is a modular EVM-compatible L1 powered by proof of liquidity. And before we get into what proof of liquidity means, I think it'll be really helpful to talk about what other blockchains use, what consensus means, and then talk about how proof of liquidity is powering really interesting applications on Berachain. So POL is Berachain's consensus mechanism that creates a flywheel of both liquidity attraction and retention through network incentives. But first, let's just cover our bases. When we say consensus mechanism, like what does that mean exactly? It's a mechanism by which the different nodes in the chain come to an agreement on the state of the chain. It's what approves transactions, what says, yes, this transaction is valid. Yes, I'm agreeing on the new state of the ledger. So let's talk about proof of stake, how consensus works on Ethereum so that we can have kind of like a base to compare to when we're talking about POL. So in proof of stake, users can stake 32 ETH to become a validator. Now you have the opportunity to become a validator, and with being a validator, you have the right to produce blocks. Validators on Ethereum are randomly selected to produce blocks, so you're not selected every single time. Some blocks you're not going to build, a block comes along, you're selected to build, you build that block, you get the fees from building that block, and in every other time where you're not chosen to build that block, you still get fees from being a validator and securing the network. And the kind of main point here is that being a validator is securing the network, right? You're one of the nodes that's contributing to the security by saying, I'm looking at all these transactions, I am attesting to the fact that yes, this transaction is valid, and I'm agreeing to the new state of the chain. So 32 ETH is locked in a smart contract, and now you have the right to be a validator and to help secure the network. What are kind of the downsides or the things that could be improved when we think about proof of stake? In proof of stake, you're locking all of this liquidity to secure the network. So if we think of 32 ETH, I don't know, at the current price, I don't know, it's a lot of money. And all of this liquidity is liquidity that's not in the ecosystem. It can't be provided to pools. It's not available for your users to leverage. So now let's talk about proof of liquidity. This is Berachain's consensus mechanism. So what we just talked about, proof of stake, is Ethereum's, and proof of liquidity is Berachain. So the first step is that users provide liquidity to one of Berachain's native dapps. This can be the DEX. And so all of the Berachain apps start with a B, but they're the ones that we all know. So it's a DEX, it's lending, and it's perps. Here, just add a B. So by doing this, you now earn BGT. BGT is the governance token of the network. And with BGT, you can delegate to validators and earn rewards from the validators, just like you would traditionally. Now, one of the things that's really interesting and that's different from proof of stake is now with BGT, as a governance token holder, you can vote on which apps get what we call network emissions. So let's say that you're building an application and you're like, hey, I want to use this new primitive that we're calling network emissions to use in my application. And when we talk about emissions, it's literally like money, funds that your application can use. So I can say, I'm a BGT holder. I think this project is really cool. I think they're long-term aligned. Whatever other rationale you have, I want to vote for this app to get BGT emissions. And only the people who are BGT holders can do this. And like zooming out a bit and not really looking at the steps, the thing that's really interesting here is that in order to become a validator, it's not just about staking ETH. It's not just about having money and being like, I have a lot of money and I'm going to stake it, now I can earn rewards. The action is now gated by doing something very valuable for the ecosystem, which is providing liquidity that now the whole ecosystem can leverage. And this is like kicks off a really cool flywheel where it has this effect that it attracts new users and it attracts new teams. So let's just go through it quickly. A user comes, they provide liquidity. Now they earn BGT. With this BGT, they can earn rewards through delegating to a staker. By doing this, now there's deeper liquidity, right? Because I gave some liquidity, now there's more liquidity than there was before. As a developer, as a team, you want to go somewhere where there's deep liquidity for the reasons that we just talked about, right? Applications need liquidity. It's something super important to consider when building. And again, it's an indicator of kind of the activity and interest on a chain. If there's more teams, there's more interesting applications, there's more things to do on the chain. This attracts more users. As new users come in, they provide liquidity because they want to earn fees, and because they want to do governance. And it like kicks off this flywheel that incentivizes sticky liquidity. So there's a lot of kind of ecosystems out there that do, all of them. Like crypto is a game of incentives, right? So every ecosystem has an incentive to bring liquidity to their chain, whether this be airdrop, whether this be retro PGF, whether this be grants. These are all different ways for ecosystems to get liquidity. And now what happens is that, okay, you've gotten liquidity, success, and then a month later a new chain launches that's doing an airdrop, that's going to do retro PGF, that's going to do something else. People, what do? They take their liquidity, they bridge it over because they want airdrop. And it kind of becomes this like musical chairs game of people moving their liquidity around, which is not really great for the ecosystem because now all of your liquidity is gone. So what's really cool about this is it incentivizes sticky liquidity, liquidity to come and liquidity to stay. Okay, and now let's talk about the other two, ecosystem and distribution. Berachain, a lot of people ask me like, Cami, why did you join Berachain? Like there's so many cool projects in the space. What made you decide on Berachain? Berachain has a super, super strong developer ecosystem with over 250 teams building, and they're pre-mainnet. And I think for anybody that's been working in the space for a while, that's pretty rare. It's really difficult for a team to get to that level, and Berachain has this really strong ecosystem. And the more projects you have, you kind of have these like new opportunities that don't really exist on chains where there's not that many ecosystem projects. And when we talk about distribution, I think this is one of the most important things for teams, because at the end of the day, right, you're building a product and you want users. So if you're building on a chain with no users, you're going to have a very hard time. And for those who don't know, I'll speed run really quick. Berachain started, its kind of origins were an NFT collection. These NFT holders became like super cult-like, and there's like these die-hard, bear holders, and a lot of things kind of came out of this initial NFT collection. So they have this very cult-like following that spans the globe. And this is like my favorite slide in the whole talk. I'm actually going to stand over here because I think I'm probably blocking it when I stand there. When you think about building something, right, your goal is to have users because you want to make money. If you don't have users, you don't make money. So your options are, you can build a product in an ecosystem with lots of users, or you can build a product and try to attract users to a new ecosystem. You can say, hey, I'm building on this chain. I'm just going to make up a chain, diamond chain. And I promise it's a cool chain. My app is really cool. You should come join this ecosystem to use my chain. Or you can go to an ecosystem that already has a ton of users and say, I'm building this cool app, and there's already a ton of distribution for you. A is exponentially easier than B. And as a builder, like, this should be one of the key considerations that you're taking when thinking about where do I build. I put this tweet here, and I'm going to scoot over here. And basically, the gist of this tweet is, I think in the end, L1s and L2s that are successful are actually going to feel a lot more like traditional brands. I think there's a group of people in crypto, Twitter, and just in crypto in general that say, we should be building headless protocols. And by headless, they mean kind of like where your brand is kind of abstracted away and no one really knows that they're using you, and like users won't really care in the end what they're using in the background because they're not going to know. My thesis is, I think the most successful ecosystems will feel like brands. They'll be known for their brands. They'll be known for their names. And the more success you have at building a strong brand, I think is going to matter in the next 10 years. So Berachain has this like really awesome brand that they're working on. And honestly, I think in the long-term game, this is going to mean something for distribution. So TLDR, Berachain, POL, chain with mechanism to attract and keep liquidity. You turbocharge applications with BGT emissions. It's EVM compatible. All the best developers in the world can start building on it today with minimal friction. Cult-like following, great distribution, healthy ecosystem. It's one of the best places, I think, in crypto to build on today. I'm going to leave some links here. I know, obviously, you can't click on these, but I'm going to put this whole presentation on my Twitter so that you can click on this. Also, if you take a picture, you'll be able to access it. But these are the resources that I think are best for thinking about starting to build on Berachain. We have the Build-A-Bear Incubator, this resource with kind of all the docs and all of the interesting writing around POL and beyond, and the Berachain handle. And that's it. Thanks so much. Oh, there's questions. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Are there any questions? I forgot we can take questions. It's okay. Say a little bit louder. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to answer from my point of view. I didn't create the chain, right? So I'm just going to give you kind of my point of view. I think there is something to be said around building an ecosystem and a brand that is your own versus kind of like an offshoot from something else. Again, I wasn't around in the very, very early days. There's team members actually that are here. Maybe they can give you a better call. But that's kind of my take. Like, if I was building something today, that would be kind of my answers. Like, if I'm an L2, there's certain kind of like restrictions that come with building an L2 versus an L1. Any other questions? Okay, cool. If anyone wants to chat, has any other questions, I'll be around after this.